Hello! Today we'll discuss how navigating CISA's secure software development attestation form can be challenging, especially with impending deadlines on June 8th and September 8th. Join us for an insightful webinar featuring Tim Brown, the CISO of SolarWinds, who successfully implemented the necessary controls and was the first to submit the form. Tim will share with us his expert knowledge, offering valuable guidance and practical tips on gathering the necessary evidence for compliance. In this webinar, you'll learn about the implications for your organization, strategies to navigate the form's requirements, even when your tech stack is complex, effective methods for collecting compliance evidence and maintaining it, and all in all, how to meet CISA's requirements efficiently. Don't miss this opportunity to gain actionable insights from a seasoned security leader. Before we begin, let's do some introductions. Tim Brown, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Duran. So Tim Brown, I'm the CISO for SolarWinds. Been here for about 7 years. Before that, I ran a lot of engineering teams, a lot of development teams in a lot of places. So, at heart, I'm an engineer. I'm an inventor. I have 15 or so, well, actually 18 patents. This said 15, but 18 patents in different things. So I've been developing a long time. And with that, we really look to say, how we can always do something better. So looking forward to talk to you about the attestation form and some of the other things that led us up to that.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I'm Duran Perry, the VP of Product of Scribe Security. For most of my career, which has been many years, I have been building enterprise cybersecurity products. Just a little bit about Scribe Security. We provide software supply chain security platforms that applies the concepts of continuous assurance and zero trust to protect software products. Our main benefits are gaining visibility into your software development lifecycle security posture through ASPM, SBOM, and pipeline discovery and security, preventing tampering with software development and build automation of continuous code signing, provenance, and attestation, governing your development lifecycle security with policy as code guardrails, and being able to continuously be compliant by automatically collecting signed evidence to demonstrate compliance with customer requirements, industry standards, and regulations. Back to you, Tim. Can you please provide a quick recap of how the CISA attestation requirement came about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you think about, what we've been going through for the last, 3-4 years, just a lot of attacks on software companies, a lot of attacks from open source components underneath them. In the case of, SolarWinds, for me, what we termed a build supply chain attack. Where the threat actor didn't change our source code, but they changed the build process in the middle. And what that sparked was, a number of government agencies looking at how we can best, kind of get transparency into that, how people build software. And, we started with executive orders. I guess it was Executive Order 14028, which came out shortly after, our SolarWinds incident. Then Secure Software Development Framework came out, or NIST 800-218 came out, shortly after that. Enduring Security Framework came out about that same time. Then the attestation form. So really all of these are meant to start providing transparency in the process for vendors to show, here's how we build software. Here's what we do from a software perspective. Here's what we include in software. All of those things are the real effort. And then the other half of this is, how do entities consume that information and get value out of it? So you have to have it's either chicken or the egg first, right? So, what we're trying to do is get more transparency from vendors, because I'm both a vendor and a consumer of software. So trying to get enough transparency so that appropriate implementations can occur, appropriate controls can be put in place, appropriate safeguards can be put into place, so that the consumers of software can take the right types of actions.
I see. So can you be a little bit more specific on how the attestation form actually is related to supply chain security and who it is?
Who is it?
Aiming?
Who is it meant for?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, supply chain itself, when we look broader, right? Supply chain can be, how individual vendor builds their products. It's the SBOMs. It's the attestation around how they develop code. It's the attestations on what their processes are for development, how they protect that development cycle, how they develop all of that. A lot of those components are inside of the attestation form, also part of enduring security framework and secure software development framework. So that's one half. The other half ends up being really the larger supply chain. When your product gets inside of a larger process, say it's a manufacturing process, your monitoring systems in the middle of there, you're part of their supply chain. Or in Change Healthcare, right, that just came up, huge, large supply chain problem, right? And in Change Healthcare, sometimes you were 3 or 4 layers deep, right? But you still couldn't process your bills. But it wasn't your entity that was affected directly, but it was somebody's entity and then somebody's entity underneath that. So when you take the broader stroke of supply chain, also important to consider. So, but each one of these is an example for us to look at and say, well, is there some place where we can do better? All right, let's start with vendors. Then let's go to get more transparency from vendors. Then let's start understanding how vendors play in a larger supply chain, and then start understanding how that all things, do we have the right controls in place to be resilient, and the right controls in place to be secure in those environments. So absolutely, the attestation form starts us from the vendor side saying, yes, I develop in a secure fashion. I meet these requirements. The requirements were pretty well laid out that what you have to meet. And then, I think the bigger thing on the attestation form is that, required signature from the CEO. So that's a big step from attestation. So it's not something that should be taken lightly.
Yeah. In this regard, this attestation is that a one-time effort, or how do you back this as time passes?
Yeah, so some of it ends up being one time, some of it ends up being longer term. I've talked about, kind of post-breach for us many times, but post-breach, we took an approach to say, how can we be exemplary? How can we help industry move forward in the way they're developing? We developed our Secure by Design program. As part of that, we did a number of different things that actually align pretty well with the self-attestation, right? So MFA everywhere, we require FIDO2 for everybody, not just developers. So we already had that in place as one of the requirements. We had the software environment split off, was one of our tenets. So it didn't live anywhere near anything else. That it was ephemeral, meaning that the software got reproduced every time, that things were not long-lived and couldn't be attacked. We actually went another step forward and did multiple build pipelines for the products that could be done, and then did comparisons at the end of those, and only ship when those comparisons match. So each one of those things set us up for the attestation in a pretty good form, right? So make sure you're logging from it, encrypt your sensitive data, implement defensive approaches. Each of those are achievable in their own right. Some are longer lived. So one of the keys to the form itself is that very important that you can specify which products you are saying do these things, and do these things in a complete fashion. So we did not just say, oh, all of our 50 products meet these requirements. We said that certain ones go through that. And before anybody was signed, I also had my internal audit team go through and look and compare. So it wasn't something that you just blindly sign and don't take it seriously. It's something that you really should go through and truly understand where you sit and what exceptions you may have.
I see. So I would say that SolarWinds is way ahead of the curve in this regard, in the way that you described that. How and can other vendors step up and also keep guard of not drifting away from what they declared in this attestation?
Yeah, and some things I don't think you'll drift too far away, right? Other things may, right? So if you've said, I think once you put the processes in place, once you have those processes kind of maintained and going well, drifting away probably won't occur in many instances. But you should always be watching, right? You should always be looking. You should always be discovering. Because I think what you'll see is more of your customers will be requesting this type of information in some form. So today, self-attestation is, again, itself. Again, it is not a mandate from corporate customers or enterprise customers. For government customers, we'll see what the real kind of meat behind this is, right? Will people stop buying if they don't have these? I can tell you we've had, customers, request our SBOM, both commercial as well as, government customers. So people are looking. They're looking now to see where they fit in, where the vendors will fit, how they consume all the data. But I do think we'll start making buying decisions on it. So as a vendor, if you're not starting to prepare, the practices that they're requesting are not unreasonable, right? In many cases, right? In most cases, I would say they're pretty reasonable, but they do take time, right? They do take effort. They do take, work to get done. Just to get the Orion base and everything else surrounding that, was a 6 month effort after the breach for us to go without, putting new features in. So build systems take time, but they are important.
So on the outset of this webinar, we promised that we'll disclose some tips on how to be efficient, lessons learned, and how to bridge the gap quicker. Yeah,
absolutely. So, a number of places. So one of the things that I found very effective, I know this is a little bit of a stretch for many, but I ended up hiring a financial auditor, ex-financial auditor, to become an IT security auditor. That has helped in a lot of ways. So that audit team helps me on my ISOs. That audit team helps me on my SOC 2s. That audit team helped me on these things. They put a different lens to things. So in many cases, I have my audit team audit things, and then my red team things to make sure that we're appropriately configured. So whether it's configuring GitHub, configuring Salesforce, or my internal infrastructure, or my development processes, I have those types of teams involved in the verification. So from an outside verification perspective, that has helped a great deal, right? Having my own internal team help do validation before I go to the next thing. The other part is really putting together a plan that allows you to address some of the kind of key requirements, right? Some of them are not as, they're change and process, but you can do them stepwise. So even if you're not ready to sign the attestation today, externalizing your development environment is a good idea, right? It really is. Making sure that it has different controls and having only the right individuals having access to it should be a good practice, right? If you have all developers having access to everything, bad, right? But so that's something you should be able to take on a stepwise approach. I'm just walking through some of the requirements here while we go. Separately and protecting each environment involving development and building software, right? Regular logging and monitoring of that environment. So absolutely, you want to make sure only the right people have access to the build environment. So nothing crazy there. MFA everywhere, very important to have. And especially anybody with a privileged access. We ended up using YubiKey and FIDO2 for majority of our environments, and that's worked well. Documentation. Consistent documentation, sometimes hard, right? Sometimes you need to go back and redocument things, but not unachievable. So I guess my point, and we don't need to go through all of these things, but the point is that if you look at each one of these requirements in their own, you'll look at it and say, well, that's not a bad requirement. Oh, that's not a bad requirement. And each one of them can be achieved. So it's not independently, each one of these is a 6-month effort. So if you start the process and then stepwise continue to improve on your processes, and then you will get to the right place for being able to, kind of execute, sign, and be comfortable signing off on the attestation form. Don't oversell. That's the other part, right? If it's not ready, then, don't say it's ready. Always be careful with that and make sure that you have the right kind of proof in place that says, yes, I have satisfied these requirements. I've satisfied these ones. And the form itself, I believe, even gives you the ability to do some controls. I know it has product versions, product names, attestation date, releases. So, sorry, I was just taking a quick look here. So there isn't really a place for compensating controls inside the form itself, but you can add it to the form when you give it to your customers and say, here, make sure you're doing these things that make us meet this guideline.
So the way you describe this, your company rebuilt or overhauled a large part of the software development and build environments. What do I do if I'm a vendor that doesn't have the time or we had an interruption here. What do you do if a vendor doesn't have the time or resources with these dates being imminent and one has already passed? Are there tools that you applied that shortened the path?
Yeah. So, I think that if you don't, I think it's starting, right? I think it's getting the appropriate people in to help if you don't have that. Please don't sign the attestation form for a product if you aren't really meeting it, because that will just get you into trouble in the end. I think depending on your business, depending on who your customers are, at some point you may be forced to do it if you're doing business with the government in different ways. But take it seriously when you do it. So really, to help, sometimes does take a modification, I would say, of your environment. There's nothing that says you need multiple pipelines here, right? There's nothing to say that you need to have, it's also level 4 here from a build perspective. We took things a lot further in many cases than what the attestation form requires. So think that the bar here is, yes, it does take change to something you weren't planning to change. It does take time away from features. It does take time away from other things. But to make the environment more resilient to attack, I think it is important to start, and it's important to get there. So really, the advice ends up being that basically start, right? And maybe you don't get a attestation, or you decide not to do attestation for your oldest products, but ones you're currently in development on, or the next new product. So that's the other way, because these things are going to be coming fast and furious, right? If you don't think customers are going to be requesting this stuff, tomorrow or in the next day and the next year, they really are, right? As I said before, we produce SBOMs, and SBOMs are being requested. More information about your development processes and what you're doing is being requested. So I think kind of gone are the days when we are just, kind of transparency is expected, as opposed to, nobody wants to see under the covers of how things are built.
I see. So we at Scribe believe in providing a solution that is an add-on to existing environments, and we also aim at customers that are not necessarily selling to the government. Can you give some advice to those that are not selling but are concerned about their supply chain security? What would be the first steps when you say to start? What would they be?
Yeah. So for those customers really that are concerned about supply chain, the first thing is starting with what's inside of your supply chain. Understanding what's there, right? So SBOM starts giving you information, gives you information about product. The other part is you want information about the vendor themselves. You want information about the practices that they're following while building. You want information about what controls you should put into place when you're running those products. Because very important to, most products, whether they're a SaaS product or whether an on-prem product, they can be configured securely, or they could be configured insecurely, right? So what can the company give me from a help perspective to, help me run in a secure fashion? I think we'll see more work in the future going on in that direction as well. I think we'll see some standards in the development of network profiles for products, right? Oh, this is what we should see. This is what we should expect. And this is a way we, so that when we see something that's out of normal, we can trigger that, hey, something strange is happening in the environment. So those types of things, getting ready to start consuming those inside usually your third-party risk management entity, or under me, it's my GRC team has third-party risk. But start consuming some things from your vendors. Start having to ask the right questions for them. Start getting SBOMs for the product, so you know what's in there. So when another OpenSSL vulnerability comes out, you'll know what third parties you should contact and ask them whether they're affected or upgrade. They need to upgrade. So from a consumer, it's really about getting to that level of expected transparency from your vendors, and then getting the processes in place internally to be able to consume that data and then act upon the data, basically on a regular basis. And that's a change for many third-party risk management, groups, because in general they collect a lot of data, but they don't go back. So I think that's the
and
other.
they don't do this continuously, right? They do this as a point in time thing.
Yeah, they do it at a point in time, and they do it, usually at procurement. So I think we will, in this kind of next generation of supply chain security, we'll see that the third-party risk groups take a stronger role, take a different role, and I think it's necessary, right? When you look at, one of the things people are not always know is that a lot of software is built from third-party libraries, right? A lot of software. So depending on the software package, anywhere from 50 to 80, 90% of it is third-party libraries. So when you think about that equation, it says, wow, I've got that many third-party libraries that aren't really controlled by my vendor, but I need to know what they are. I need to know when they have a vulnerability in them. I need to know how to, adjust my, profile for that. So the whole purpose is really, how we get enough information and knowledge, from the vendors, from folks like us to be able to define our security around those vendors in an appropriate fashion. So that's what secure software development frameworks are. That's what this attestation form is. That's what our movement towards secure supply chain is. It's all about, how do we make sure that we are doing the best we can to manage risk associated with, our usage of those, vendor solutions.
So we have time for one last quick question. You talked a lot about consumers of software. Let's turn our gaze to producers. I'm a producer. I already have an AppSec program. What should I do next to protect my development lifecycle?
Yeah. So as a producer, right? I mean, I think a number of different things go into, protecting, right? Absolutely. Some of the things that I call out here, right? Segmentation of your environment, making sure that only the right people have access to, the right software at the right time. Making sure that you have really an assume breach mindset and test it. So, if Doran gets corrupted or his machine gets taken over, or aliens come out and take him over, right? What are we going to do? So will he be able to affect your build processes and your code? It's a big bar to test, but that's one of the things that you have to think about. And it's a good thought exercise in general, right? How resilient am I to a malicious or non-malicious insider that's part of my life cycle? So start thinking there. And then just from the outside, how am I protected, right? What's the likelihood somebody could get into my environment, get to my build system, change something in the build systems that would affect things? Do you have, peer reviews turned on for every GitHub submit, and do you review those? Do you make sure that you have all of these controls in place around each one of these components or parts of your life cycle? Because we're really looking to be as tamper resistant and as efficient as possible. And then understand what those third-party components are, because as a vendor, you are dependent on them. You need to know what they are. You need to know whether they have vulnerabilities in them. You should be looking at them constantly, because they change so often. So very important to understand that and look at them on a regular basis.
I would add to this, and our time is almost up, that what we see in the market from different organizations is that they also need some visibility to discover what what are their pipelines, what is their SDLC, having multiple groups of developers, and those SecOps people wouldn't know everything about all the pipelines that go on building and deploying stuff. You think this is true from your point of view?
Yeah, for many, right? Because if it's not just products that produce, it's not just companies that produce products to sell to customers, right? It's also just internally, right? We
Yeah.
build a lot of products internally for internal use. And, the same questions come up. The same questions of, well, do you know what your supply chain is for the product that you're building for our internal use, right? Do you know what components are in it? Do you know, what vulnerabilities exist in those products? Do you know how they're building? So tying them all together under, kind of one framework is, extremely helpful, right? It gives you a view across, the environment that allows you then to prioritize the actions that you can take. And then you'll see commonality. Oh, everybody's using OpenSSL version blah, right? Or some have changed, some have not. So the complexity associated with development is not, by any means should not be considered simple, right? There's a lot of complexity. There's the visibility is hard to get. So visibility under one framework is always, super useful.
Tim, I want to thank you very much for attending this talk here. So thank you. And for the audience, thank you for listening, and see you on our next webinar.
Thank you, everyone.